Good afternoon, everyone. I am Hricha Joshi, Assistant Professor at Devsthali Vidyapeeth College of Pharmacy, Rudrapur, Uttarakhand. I am happy to share that Institute has planned to deliver series of online lectures on COVID-19, which are divided into various parts. And today, I am going to deliver the lecture on Part 1, that is History and Origin of COVID-19. So these are the contents. First we will talk about the characteristics, history of coronaviruses, COVID timelines, coronavirus pathogenesis, SARS-CoV-2 transmission, COVID-19 transmissions and precaution, conclusion, and finally the references. So looking into the characteristics, the coronaviruses are generally enveloped viruses with a single-stranded RNA as nucleic material. The genetic material is basically single-stranded, and the surface of the coronaviruses consists of spherical bulbous surface, and the spherical projections have a diameter of around 125 nanometer. And there are about 6 species of coronaviruses which occur in humans, and one species has been divided into 2 different strains. Thus overall there are total 7 strains of human coronaviruses. As you can see in the flow chart that RNA viruses have been divided into 3 types based on the strand: single strand positive sense, single strand negative sense, and single strand double strand. And coronaviruses are in the section of single stranded enveloped viruses. Coronaviruses, therefore, they belong to the family of Coronaviridae, and the order is Neurovidales. And these coronaviruses, they have a crown-like spikes on the outer surface of the virus. The outer surface has a covering of crown-like structure, crown-like spike proteins, and therefore it is named as coronaviruses. Generally, these viruses are enveloped also, and they are very minute in size, about 65 to 125 nanometer in diameter, and further they have a single-stranded RNA as nucleic material. Dr. Peter Pilot, who is a doctor at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, he declared that virus is so tiny that it cannot be seen with a regular microscope. Also, he stated that there are 100 million of viral particles of novel coronaviruses that can be fit into a pinhead. The pinhead size is so small, as you can imagine the size of a pinhead, and then you can imagine the size of the coronaviruses, how much small they would be, that 100 millions of these particles are fitting just into a pinhead. So looking at the structure of the coronaviruses, as it consists of crown-like projections of spike proteins, which are also referred as S protein, and these are transmembrane fusion proteins which are made up of a number of amino acids, then a membrane covering the whole of the virus particles, and the nucleocapsid which covers the genetic material. The RNA material is enclosed inside the nucleocapsid. Here is enveloped, also these viruses are enveloped, which is an integral membrane protein. Moving further, these viruses are a big family, and the infection diseases are caused from these newly discovered coronaviruses, and the illness can range from common cold to more severe form. So the symptoms could be mild, also moderate, and it can also lead to severe diseases. SARS-CoV and the MERS-CoV were the 2 coronaviruses which were detected in 2003 and 2012 respectively. And the infected people, they experiences mild to moderate respiratory illnesses, and the patients or the people who are already having some medical problems are more prone to exposure to these viruses, like if the patient is having serious diseases, diabetes, chronic respiratory disorder, or cancer, they may develop serious type of illness from this virus. Looking into the classification of 3 human coronaviruses which produce potentially severe symptoms, they are MERS-CoV, SARS-CoV, and SARS-CoV-2, which we will discuss individually in the next segments. Now coming to the history of coronaviruses. So first of all, these 3 severe viruses which are very much severe in humans. First of all, SARS-CoV was originated in 2003 in Guangdong, China, and it has symptoms of pneumonia with different alveolar injury, and it led to acute respiratory distress syndromes, and nearly it infected about 8,000 people, and 766 were death counts. And then after that, MERS-CoV was originated in Saudi Arabia in 2012. It also had the same type of mild upper respiratory injury and followed by pneumonia, ARDS and renal failure, and about more than 2,428 infected were there and 838 deaths were recorded. Finally, SARS-CoV-2, which was seen in Wuhan, China in 2019, had pneumonia-like symptoms followed by ARDS and multiple organ failure, and the infections and the death rates have been higher and higher, and they are keeping on getting increased. So as we look into the history, the first common coronaviruses were originated in 1960, and they were named as 229E, NL63, OC43, HKU1, and they were reported worldwide, and none of the cases were reported and none of the deaths were reported from this common coronaviruses. Then after that, SARS-CoV, which was seen in 2003, it affected 29 countries and 8,086 cases were reported, and there were more than 700 deaths. MERS-CoV then affected in 2013, it affected largely about 27 countries, and about 2,000 approximately cases were recorded, and approximately 838 deaths were recorded till November 2019. After that, COVID-19 affected about 166 countries with 3 lakhs cases in China till 22nd March 2020, and 13,000 deaths were recorded till March 2020 only. And the highly possible infected strain of the CoV is yet to be known. So where did the coronaviruses came from? So origination of basically all of these viruses, the simple coronaviruses was discovered in 1960. It has just flu-like symptoms. After that, SARS was in 2002 and 2003, which was originated in China again. MERS-CoV, which basically originated in 2012 till now, it has been originated in Saudi Arabia. Now looking up to the experts, what the experts says, they say that SARS-CoV-2 has been originated in bats, and COVID-19 is the 5th pandemic disease. Origin and the source of SARS-CoV still it is unknown, and we will see how it still remains unknown. Initial cases that has been associated, these were associated with the Hunan South China seafood market, and in this market snakes, birds and other animals such as bats were also sold. So initial cases have been reported to this particular location. Bat origin has been suspected because there are some of the suggestions which suggest that 96% genome sequences were identified between SARS-CoV-2 and another coronaviruses which was found out in bat, that was isolated from bat, named as bat-CoV RATG13. The virus was isolated from bat and SARS-CoV-2. They both had 96% of genomic identity. And it is also believed that this virus jumped the species barrier to human, and from the jumping there had been an intermediate animal, intermediate host. It could have been a domestic food animal or it could have been a wild animal between the bat and the human. So as we look into the figure, that bat has been the origin, suspected bat origin, and SARS-CoV, which was seen in 2003, the intermediary animals are cavite cat, and after that MERS-CoV, dromedary camels have been the intermediary animals, and still the 2019 nCoV, the intermediary animal still remains unknown, and these three are leading to the transmission directly into the humans. After that, pangolins were also suggested as natural host of coronaviruses. There were suggestions that pangolins, which are generally scaly ant-eaters, were also suggestion as a natural host for coronaviruses, and first case was tracked back into 17 November 2019. Evidences also prove that human-to-human transmission, the proof also became strongly supported when in January 2020, when WHO visited the conduct in the city of Wuhan, then evidences become strongly supported that it has been, the coronaviruses had been transmitted from human to human. And by the end of January, new coronaviruses has been declared a public health emergency of international concern by WHO. First outbreak was recognized in February 2020 and disease spreaded rapidly till then around the world. And as of 17 June 2020, according to European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, about 81,42,129 cases of COVID-19 and 4,43,488 deaths have been reported worldwide since December 31, 2019. And all over the worldwide cases, the American continent became one of the highest number of cases, with countries like US and Brazil in the lead positions. And about more than 6.05 million cases were reported around May 2020. And then in March 11, 2020, COVID-19 was declared as a pandemic by WHO because the scale and speed of transmission of disease was very, very high. It started as an epidemic in mainland China because the main strain originated was in the city of Wuhan in China in February 26. And some of the etiology also suggested that COVID-19 was isolated and identified as novel coronaviruses, and it was initially designated as 2019 nCoV. After that, viral genome was sequenced again, and it was also seen that the genomic sequences were similar between the SARS of 2003 and coronaviruses. Therefore, the name SARS-CoV-2 was given by International Committee for Taxonomy of Viruses. So hence it is clearly seen then that the name SARS-CoV-2 was given because the viral genomic sequence of SARS, which was seen in 2003, was similar to the one which occurred in 2019. So as you can look at the different articles of newspapers, that the virus was different from the other coronaviruses, and it was pandemic. It was declared as pandemic. Wuhan had a lockdown after the coronavirus outbreak. Now coming to the timelines, what happened in what time. So in December 31, 2019, WHO was alerted by China that they had severe cases of pneumonia, and the cause was not known, and the disease was named as COVID-19. In January 7, WHO announced that the new virus was named as SARS-CoV-2 and it belonged to the family of coronaviruses. Then after that, January 11, China announced the first death that was linked to COVID-19. In January 13, WHO reported the first case, which was outside China in Thailand. In February 26, NIH began the clinical trial. It was the first clinical trial in US. And 29 February, FDA took steps, and again the expansion of testing began in the hospitals, clinicals, and microbiological laboratories. In March 11, WHO declared COVID-19 a pandemic disease, and in April, 2 confirmed cases of COVID-19 were recorded of about 1 million worldwide cases. In April 10, global deaths were due to COVID-19. Coronaviruses pathogenesis. So looking into the initial history of coronaviruses, the first case was reported in 1960, and according to the Canadian study in 2001, nearly 500 people were infected and they had just flu-like symptoms, and about 17 to 18 cases were reported, and they had confirmed to have coronavirus strain, and till 2002 this virus was not proved as a factory. After that, 2003, as we discussed earlier, that in Guangdong, China, people started having the symptoms of pneumonia. Then they had acute respiratory distress symptoms, and death were also reported, and this virus was reported as SARS-CoV, and there were proofs and there were reports of spread of virus in US, America, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and overall there were about approximately 8,000 people were infected, and about approximately 700 deaths were recorded. So as you can see in the data, this is the SARS probable cases from SARS worldwide cases in 2003, the data that there were around 8,000 infections. So as you can see, the global distribution of the Sarcopte in 2003, that over 8,000 infections were there, and there were 10% death rates. And you can see that China has been the leading country in the cases. After that, you can see that Hong Kong and Canada, United States have also a good amount of cases due to Sarcopte. Then in 2012 in Saudi Arabia, again people were further diagnosed like Sark-like symptoms, and this disease was later named as Merck's CoV, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, because this disease occurred in the Middle East part of the world, and more than 2,428 people were infected, and there were 838 deaths because of this viruses. So you can see that first outbreak was in 2012 in Jordan, and the latest outbreak of Merck's is reported in 2020 in Saudi Arabia, and the potential reservoir for this infection has been bats, dromedary camels and alpacas. And as per 2020 data by WHO, total cases, deaths, and there had been fatality rate of about 34.3%. So in 2012, when the Merck's CoV, the novel coronavirus of 2012 were recorded, it was discovered in Qatar and Saudi Arabia. WHO started to investigate the disease spread, and in September 2012 to 2014, WHO has been informed that there were about total 153 cases of Merck CoV, which included about 64 deaths, and 27 countries were reported to have the cases of Merck's CoV. Merck's moves to east, so you can see the data of countries with their cases and the death rate that occurred, number of deaths occurred, and leading countries Saudi Arabia and Saudi Korea overtook UAE position, and it became second largest number of reported cases, with having around 7 deaths. As you can see the chart having the Merck cases in Saudi Arabia, so you can record that the mortality rate is comparatively less than the recovery rate. That means the recovery rate was also good. And Saudi Arabia, the cases were 1019, deaths were 450 deaths were there, and in UAE 76 deaths were recorded. After that, you can see that countries like Greece, Malaysia, Turkey, Yemen, Austria, China, Egypt, Italy, they have reported single cases, and all over the disease occurred. And you can see the global distribution of Merck's global case in 2012 to 2017, and you can see that the highest leading position is of Saudi Arabia with high number of cases. So the Merck's CoV generally affected the Middle East part of the world. What could be the source of viruses? So Merck's CoV was also it is a zoonotic viruses. That means it is a virus that is transmitted between animal and people, and studies have been there, and studies have shown that human infected either through the direct contact with each other or through the indirect contact with the infected dromedary camels. So the intermediary host was dromedary camel which were infected. And generally, this Merck CoV had been identified in the dromedary countries in several parts of Middle East, Africa and South Asia. Although the origin of the viruses has not been fully understood, but according to the analysis of the different genomes, it is believed that it has been originated in the bat and then was transported or transmitted to the camels in distant past. After that, in 2019 December, the Wuhan city of China was attacked by coronaviruses again, and in the initial 50 days of the epidemic, about 18,000 people were killed and infected were about 70,000 individuals were affected, and possibly the reported spread of virus was related to the seafood market. So here is the timeline for the outbreak. In December 31, 2019, 41% outbreak were recorded in Wuhan, China. In January 2020, first US case was reported. After that, in April 2, 1 million global cases were reported. In September 22, 2020, and in September 28, 2020, till that 1 million global deaths were recorded, and till November 9, 2020, 50 million global deaths were recorded. strategic objectives which were taken by WHO. So generally WHO had different objectives leading to the prevent the transmission and the spread of coronavirus. First of all, it was the interruption of human transmission. That means reduction of the infection among the close contacts, the healthcare workers, that will lead to the prevention of transmission and amplification event, and therefore further it will lead to the international spread prevention. After that, second objective was to identify, isolate and to take care of the patient, also the infected patient also. After that, the identification and reduction of transmission from the animal source, and addressing the crucial unknown regarding the clinical severity. Common people were addressed about the clinical severity, the transmission extension and infection, options of treatment, accelerates the development of diagnostic therapeutics and vaccines. And communication was done regarding the critical risk and event information to all the communities and counter misinformation. And there were the minimization of social economic impact through multi-sectorial partnerships. Sarcopte transmission. So if we look into the transmission of Sarcopte, the putative source of Sarcopte had been till now the studies have shown that it has been a bat origin, and then animal to animal transmission, the potential intermediate host is still unknown, and animal has transported or transmitted the disease to human, and human transmissions were recorded when there is a crowded place, in hospitals, and also when there are close contact between two individuals. Now looking into the origin and evaluation of coronaviruses, about 41 patients which had which were reported to have the exposure of coronaviruses. Out of 41 patients, about 66% had exposure to seafood market. That means they had the exposure to seafood market, but overall the index cases, they had not been any exposure to seafood market. Furthermore, the virus was identified, the virus was not at all identified in any of the animal which was sold in the seafood market. This suggested that there had been a significant human-to-human transmission also. After that, the genetic structure of the viruses, it revealed a clue that there had been a sub-point that it has been transmitted from animal. Some point, genetic structure of viruses was such that there had been a transmission from animal, but how and when, it is not clear yet. Okay, then after that, genome sequences was identified from 5 patients. The sequences of genomes were taken, and they had 79.6 sequence identified to SARS-CoV of 2003, and 96% was similarity to bad coronaviruses. That means the virus was also related to SARS-CoV of 2003, and the origin also suggested that 96% was similar to bad coronavirus. So overall, what could we conclude from the diagram? That SARS-CoV of 2003, the intermediate animal had been cavet cat, and it transmitted then to the humans. The MERS-CoV, it transmitted into the dromedary camels, and dromedary camels are responsible for transmission into the human. And if we look at the SARS-CoV-2 of 2019, then pangolin, snakes were suggested, but still the unknown animal still remains unknown, that what was the actual animal which was responsible for the transmission to human. COVID-19 transmission and precautions. If we look into the transmission, so generally the longer the air droplets, or the droplets, larger respiratory particles of liquid, SARS-CoV-2 is generally spreaded from these larger droplets, but generally these droplets also tend to fall in the adjacent surfaces, but they do not travel into the long distances, and traveling along the long distances on the air current is not a significant factor for the spread of this infection. That means it is not necessary that the infection is caused only when the droplets travel into the air current over a long distances. What could be the precautions for COVID-19? Contact and droplet precautions could be taken. Addition of airborne precautions for respiratory good misses can be taken, hand hygiene should be maintained, environmental cleaning should be done, and cleaning of shared patient care should be done. On presentation or admission to the hospital, the patient should be given a surgical mask to put on. He or she should be placed in a single isolated room and placed in negative pressure room, and if transfer has been outside the room is essential. If the patient needs to be transferred outside the room, the patient should wear a surgical mask during the transfer to follow the respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette. Now, what could we conclude? So what we have learned from the investigation of first known human COVID-19 cases, that as soon as the first case was reported in late 2019, investigation started searching to understand what could be the epidemiology of COVID-19, the original source of stock owners, market employees, regular visitors to this market. Environmental samples were also taken from this market in December 2019 and they were tested positive for Sarcopte. Therefore, it suggested that market in the Wuhan city was the source of this outbreak when the samples were tested positive. And it also suggested that they played the Wuhan city, the market Wuhan city, it played a very, very important role in the initial amplification of the outbreak. Then market was closed in January 1, 2020. It was cleaned and disinfected, and now there were two chances that either virus could have been introduced into the human population from an animal source in the sea food market, or the infected human could have introduced the virus into that market, and the viruses had then became amplified in the market environment. So, looking into what WHO is doing to identify the source of SARS-CoV-2, WHO is continuously in collaboration with experts, member states, other partners to identify the gaps and the search priorities for the control of COVID-19. It is also being indulged in the identification of the actual source of SARS-CoV-2 in China. And WHO also provides advices to the countries and individuals on the prevention control that are specific to COVID-19. So there were some of the references from which the data has been taken. And after that, there were certain questions like, is coronavirus transmitted from animals to humans? So the answer is no. Coronaviruses does not transmit from does not transmit to animals from human. Although to human there could have been an animal transmission. The intermediary animal could have been there that transmitted the viruses from species barrier to human, but reverse process is not there. And how is SARS-CoV-2 novel? So the answer is that as we look into the viral genomic structure, already the SARS-CoV and MERS-CoV, which were seen in 2003-2012, they have had, the studies have suggested that they had their intermediary animal which was responsible for the transmission. So we could relate the genomic sequences of these animals. But in case of SARS-CoV-2, still the origin is still unknown, and the intermediary animal between the origin, if we look that bat is the origin, but the intermediary animal between the bat and the human still remains unknown. So hence we could relate that SARS-CoV-2 is still novel. And as COVID-19 occurs in invertebrates, so the answer is no, it does not occur in invertebrates. So thank you for listening, and the next segment, next parts of the series will be delivered soon.